So great to be here. My name's Lexi Mills. My job has always been working in the PR SEO field. Now, what I've been focused on over the last year is how do you own the whole digital high street? How do you use PR and SEO to harness this whole new frontier of reputation management and marketing? And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. We're going to look at the evolution of PR SEO and its increasing role in brand. What does the digital high street look like when you're focused on PR SEO? And what content do you need to fuel this new critical digital high street real estate? And then we're going to look a little bit at how do you stay ahead of this curve, by owning the whole neighborhood. So let's get right in there. Let's look at the evolution of PR, SEO, and brand. Now, over the last sort of 10, 15 years, I've been working with brands and agencies like this, largely to help them build links and get coverage from places like this, to essentially either move things up rankings to increase footfall on the digital high street, or sometimes to move things down to remove digital litter or brand reputation things. But as Google continues on its mission to organize the world's information and make it useful and accessible, it's been increasingly releasing updates that make our search results look a lot richer, like these ones on desktop and these ones on mobile. Essentially, with every update, the digital high street expands, as do the opportunities and the threats. And so this linear approach of using PR SEO just to push things up and down is no longer sufficient. We need to be expanding it to this whole new space. So let's have a look at what digital high street focused PR SEO looks like. Now, on your screen in front of you, you'll see a search result for Greycroft, one of the world's biggest VC firms. And you'll notice that they have a rich result on the right-hand side, as you would expect for a big company. Now, if you were a smaller company, but you wanted to play in this field, you might say, well, let me use PR SEO to help me get a rich result on the side. Now, Syndicate Room is a much smaller company than Greycroft, but now their storefronts look the same when somebody is searching around. And essentially, this is being used as a brand signaling tool. And we can use it for brand protection as well. So last year, online learning exploded. And we were working with a company called Esme, who do incredible online courses. And they were launching their new website alongside a new course all at the same time. And this was challenging because we needed that course to come up the top of Google the moment that it went live. But that's pretty hard to do with a new website. So we had to think strategically about what parts of the digital high street could we own quicker whilst we waited for search rankings to increase. And so the importance of integrated PR and SEO to create trust came to the forefront. Yes, we needed to get traffic through to this website. Yes, we wanted to make sales, but actually being at the very top of Google was going to help them with brand recognition and make it clear that this was their new course and that nobody else could mimic them, because online mimicking was becoming quite an issue. So we have a fairly strict process of how we launch anything. And most of the work goes into the pre-launch phase. So we worked on drafting our media materials and doing lots of prospecting and pre-selling into media so that we had a bunch of links ready to go the moment the course went live. But we focused on something else, identifying partner sites and channels that we could leverage for links. Now, we weren't just trying to get links through to the client side. We decided that what we needed to do was get some links through to a very key piece of coverage that we knew would optimize fast, because then we could get ourselves a rich result. So when the course went live, all of our press went live, and we got all of our partner assets up. And so this is an example of a piece that went up on the University of Oxford site. And these are some of the pieces of coverage that went live with multiple different types of links in. And within a couple of hours, we managed to get the Yahoo Finance result right at the top of Google. And this meant that people could find our course, find information about it really fast without having to scroll down. And then within a few days, we allowed the links to point more at the client side, and we managed to translate that result over to the client's website. But this really was a combination of PR and SEO working together, understanding what was viable at what time in order to create the right brand trust signals. We've also found that businesses are more concerned with the space around them and the impact this has on brand perceptions, trust, conversions, investment, and even acquisition. So for example, if we look at TransferWise, yes, they have this great panel down the side. They also have a great set of coverage that comes up that's really quite positive for them. But we live in an increasingly zero-click world. People want to do less clicks and find more information. And Google is helping us do this, but it's also suggesting questions that we may not want our audience to be seeing, or we do not want to be creating a superhighway to them. And so brands are becoming more concerned with tackling questions like this. And for example, if you click on "Is TransferWise a safe company?", you get suggested this search, which now opens up a whole new area of the digital high street with more and more reputation challenges. And so what we want to do is try and own these. What we see here is TransferWise complaints, and the first result is that they own it. So they can be the answer to that. And that's what we increasingly have to do. But this level of PR SEO integration cannot be done in a silo. We cannot just have one or two parts of the organization working together. Everyone has to work together to get this amount of results because the space we're targeting is so much wider. We need more links pointed at more places. And so we need scalable solutions because just scaling link building is not a solution as the space gets bigger and bigger every day. So let's have a quick look at what sort of content you need on your site to really help you fuel this digital real estate. Firstly, we have found that having rock-solid FAQs is imperative, updating these regularly so that when these questions come up in Google, you stand a better chance of optimizing for them. And you need more and more on-site content, such as blogs and learning centers that you can point links at and that can optimize for these different types of questions and terms. We also find that About Us sections are even more important because a lot of the brand trust questions that we see come up are around where is this company from, where is it hosted, how long has it been around, all these things that help us determine if we're going to put our money somewhere, if we're going to put our payment details in. So having a really good About Us page is now a lot about targeting these wider areas of the digital high street. And we need to have really good press centers. What you can see in front of us is what we perceive to be the best structure for a press center. You have all of your news, your research, your media assets all hosted in one very clear place, so that if anyone is checking you out, they can be certain that the news that they've read has come directly from you. And this is important from both a user perspective, a journalist perspective, but also from an algorithm perspective. And I'll share this deck so you can get the rough outline of a press center. It doesn't need to be rocket science, but it does need to be crawlable. We've also found that if you want to get multiple links, getting them through to specialist bios is one of the best ways to do this. And NerdWallet has an incredible page for this. They make it very clear who all their specialists are, what their key subjects areas are, and really detail out every aspect of why they deserve to be the expert in that area. And that means when you're putting out a piece of press, you can link to the About Us section, you can link to the person's bio, you can link to the FAQs. And that means you can get multiple unique links in an article, which further means that you can filter that SEO equity through to the sorts of pages that you need it on to tackle these wider brand issue results. Now, we've seen over the last year that trust has been a big issue with information, more than ever before, because our survival, our safety has depended on it. And all of the digital platforms have been aiming to try and help us resolve this and understand it better. So we see Instagram putting up alerts, we see Facebook telling us if an article is too old. And one of the key things we've seen is the Google sentiment algorithm fluctuate all over the show. And this isn't like bygone algorithms. It isn't static. They turn it up and they turn it down. And what we've been seeing is Google is trying to show a mixture of different types of results, in both positive and negative subject matter. But we've also seen that Google is trying to show a greater distribution of sources. We can no longer hold the amount of spaces on one page that we used to. And that means that we have to accept that PR coverage is actually going to be a part of the mix. And we have to accept that we can't own every result in detail. So if there's a negative result coming up, it's not all bad news. what we've noticed is that you can optimize different results on the same site. So if you're getting a negative result from a piece of old coverage on a particular news site, if you start to point links at more positive coverage, we find that those start to come into the search results more and more. So you're not completely hindered by bad results because of this algorithm change. But if we want to tackle this, we also have to be braver in our media strategies. We have to tackle the uncomfortable subjects because Google wants to show a mixture of subject matter and sentiment. And this is exactly what we had to do when we worked with a firm called Games Careers Week. They wanted to promote diversity in the gaming industry and get more people into gaming careers. And we knew that when we looked at Google thinks that video games are maybe bad parenting. Now, we could have completely steered away from this subject matter, but knowing that Google is going to be putting up both negative and positive results, we thought, no, let's tackle this head on. Let's make this the core of our strategy. So when we built out our campaign, we used our normal process, but we baked in questions with all of our experts and into all of our media materials about whether gaming is bad parenting. And then we launched a radio campaign where we discussed this online and on radio. And we got a bunch of coverage across the board that talked about the aspirations of Games Careers Week and the concerns. And by tackling both, we honestly got more coverage than I think we ever would have gotten if we hadn't tackled that uncomfortable subject matter. And more importantly, we set the client up to be able to be featured in these uncomfortable search results and these bad sentiments, because actually it was them talking positively and really challenging the subject. And allowing them to ultimately optimize for more sentiments allowed them more exposure. So now we've had a look at the evolution of PR, SEO, and brand. What does the digital high street focused PR SEO look like and what content you need? And we've looked a little bit about staying ahead of the curve through the sentiment analysis. But I want to show you about owning the whole digital neighborhood, because this is where I think the new frontier really sits. We have to think more long term. And when we were working with Games Careers Week, we were really aware that actually long term, the fact that when you look at games careers on images and that the people in those images aren't diverse was going to be a big issue. And so when we were looking at this, we thought, okay, short term, we can get awareness for their event. But long term, the company goals will not be met when people can't see themselves in this industry. So as part of our campaign, we wanted to create a scalable approach to managing the neighborhood as well as their digital high street. And we launched a project where we invited people to submit images of people who in games careers across the world of multiple ages, ethnicities, and genders. And we began what will be the world's largest image library of diversity in gaming that's completely royalty-free. So we're making it easier for media to get more diverse images, essentially solving the digital neighborhood issue over time. And this is both practical and an ethical approach. Now, if we really want to own the neighborhood, we have to be aware that this isn't always going to be positive. Yes, in this instance, we were opening up search results and changing something to look more positive. But when we're looking around our neighborhoods, we have to be aware of what maybe isn't being said. Now, recently, I did a search for sexual assault lawyer, and something really shocked me here. When you look at these search results, there is one result that is neutral. All the rest are companies, pages upon pages of companies that defend people who are accused. And there is a subtext communicated by that. The neighborhood is lacking in defense. It is telling people that there is limited defense for people who have been hurt, and it is also telling potential assailants that there is unlimited people to protect them, which is ultimately going to change behavior and culture. And we need to be aware that our digital neighborhoods have this ability to not just influence culture, but also our businesses. So we need to create a neighborhood watch approach to reach our audiences and ultimately create the world that we want to be living in. Now, over the last year, the internet changed massively. I mean, for the first time in the history of me working on it, something superseded porn, and it was COVID. and we became wildly obsessed with things like toilet paper. But we also saw the biggest internet neighborhood takeover focused on one cause ever. You know, whether you looked on YouTube, whether you looked on Instagram, WhatsApp, or Facebook, we were all focused, and every entity was permeating their neighborhood with COVID advice and information. And because we had such an increase in search, this meant that the majority of searches over 2020 were around a very core focus, coronavirus, as you would expect. Now, what I think is really exciting about this is that we have shown for the first time what a blueprint of what a full internet neighborhood takeover looks like, focused on one goal. And what I'm really excited about is if we take this in the future and we apply it to things like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we have the ability to make those trend, to make those have the greatest awareness that we had for COVID. And ultimately, the possibilities to create a better world become limitless, combining this neighborhood approach with PR, SEO, content, but also the internet organizations to create awareness. So we've had a look at the evolution of PR, SEO, and brand. We've dipped into what the digital high street PR, SEO looks like. We've looked at what content you need, and we've looked at how you stay ahead of this digital curve by owning the neighborhood. So in summary, if you're only going to take away a few points today, I'd like you to think about what does the expanding digital high street present in terms of both risks and opportunities for you and your organizations and your culture. Recognize that we have to integrate to tackle the whole landscape, and we need to notice what isn't there, because that is as important as what is in many instances. Thank you very much.
Hi, Lexi. Thank you so much for your presentation. I want to wait a few minutes. Maybe there's no question right now, but maybe our audience ask some questions. And I would like to say it's really a good point of view to see the events, what's missing. It's a really good point of view. And you have shown us very good examples, projects. Thank you so much.
We've been exploring a lot in the financial industry as well. So we've been looking at what search results come up when you type in different debt queries, or if you're looking at for certain types of financial advice. And one of the things we notice is that most people who type in get rid of debt get different search results and different ads to people who say, how do I manage debt? And what we're realizing is that the digital neighborhood and the digital high street around debt actually changes how people get out of it or stay in it. If you have bad grammar, most firms who are giving quick payday loans that help people stay in debt serve those queries. Whereas if you have good grammar, you have a better chance of getting out of debt. So we're finding that our education changes the neighborhoods we end up in. And it also changes the neighborhoods of what businesses are targeting us. And I think in the future, what we'll start to see is a greater requirement for more diverse results based on our use of language. And I think that's really exciting because we don't have true opportunity when our education restricts our progress.
Yes, you're right. Thank you so much. And there are comments. Perfect presentation. Thank you. Good learning. What an elaborated speech. Thank you so much. I think we don't have any questions, but lots of thanks from our audience. Thanks for everyone for watching us and for watching Lexi. Okay, hello. I took a digital marketing training for 1 month and a half, 3 days a week. Can you give me an advice on how to start to be a digital marketing specialist? It's a general question, but maybe you can give a nice point to start as an advice.
Sure. So from my experience, the best campaigns I've ever seen come because people care about the subject matter. The first foot forward should be in a subject matter you really care about. Your observation skills are higher. You will notice certain things. And so if you can do that, and start yourself off in an industry that you're really passionate about, you'll already be ahead. You'll have a greater awareness. The trick I find with digital marketing is to make sure you have a wide group of friends. You need to not get stuck, even if you're passionate, in just speaking to people you know. You want to make sure that you're finding out who your audience is and testing all of your presumptions. And you need to get geeky. I am that annoying person at everyone's house who wants to see people's internet history. I want to know what they've searched for. I want to know what terms they used. And I've learned a lot that way. I've realized that that's how I learned about the difference in grammar and search results. I've also been looking at the difference in geographies, and I test this all the time. To be a good digital marketeer, you have to be passionate, you have to be obsessive, and it almost has to be, in my opinion, it has to be a game. It has to be fun to you. It can't just be work.
Thank you so much. Any suggestions on building trust online, especially for newly established fintech companies?
Fintech companies are interesting. So yes, you need to make sure that you own that whole digital high street. Anything to do with fintech or finance, people are going to check you out. And so if you don't have those side panels, that's a problem. You also need to make sure that you get well ahead of that curve of getting content on your site to answer tough questions, because otherwise somebody else is going to own those answers. And inherently, we find whoever is first usually holds the spot for longer. So taking those questions back into your own ownership can be really problematic. And I would advise that you look for where audiences are that aren't straightforward. When we work with fintech companies, everyone wants to be in financial advice pages. But honestly, the people who need financial advice aren't there. People who need financial advice or need support are typing in very different things. They're looking for designer handbags. They're saying, how do I solve this annoying issue? And so thinking a little bit wider about that neighborhood and capturing people there means that you can capture and rescue people from quite traumatic situations, sometimes before they even realize they are dangerous. And I think the companies that do that over the next few years will really accelerate their progress.
Thank you so much. Let's move to another question. Your vision is to be essential in digital marketing world. The question is this model is flexible enough to adapt to different models?
When you're saying, can you repeat the question just so I'm making sure I'm understanding it?
Is this model is flexible enough to adapt to different models, actually?
So this will adapt to multiple sectors. There is no sector where this wider search space doesn't influence our perspectives. It doesn't have to be geography specific. You do get richer results, I find, in the UK and the US compared to countries like South Africa or Australia, but those will come over time. So it's not restricted to geography, and it's not restricted to sector. There are some elements that are harder to generate over different periods of time, and it is constantly changing, which is why you need a multi-pronged strategy. You need to make sure that you're ready for whatever flexes come in the algorithm. And that isn't something we've had to be as prepared for in the past. We've usually been able to see a change, get whatever content we want up and optimize it. But because this space is just moving around constantly, no matter where you are, we need to have that, essentially that foundation built. And that foundation requires a lot more content than ever before.
Thank you. Regarding reputation management, how can you possibly challenge the existence of other high authority site links that shows on your knowledge panel?
It is challenging and it's not easy. I would say start wider. Start with, don't go for best fintech firm. Go for how do I lower my cost of X and Y when traveling? Go for something wider and try and get those results first and then move up. To PR SEO is an odd thing in that it takes a lot of buy-in, because you're not just employing one agency and sending them off to do it. You have to get people to work together. And one of the most important parts of a PR SEO strategy is making sure that you continue to get buy-in. So start with wider search results and then go for the really hard ones. When we were working with a fintech firm a few years ago, they wanted to target the search query credit card debt statistics. We went instead for impulse spending statistics. It actually had an equal search volume, but it was less challenging. And when we won there, we'd gotten so many links and increased our domain authority in that particular geography and in that particular sector that it became easier to start to challenge the bigger search results that we would have been intimidated to do beforehand.
Thank you. Another question from Umut. For fashion online shopping sector, what will you be advising for Pr Seo cooperation?
So if you're looking at online shopping, we need to think that our products people don't just type in our products and go and get it. We need to think about the needs they fulfill. Now, in traditional PR, you'll often try and get products placed in a particular area, right? That's one of the areas you build links from. But you don't just have to do that. You can talk about the wider application, the wider value of your products, and try and get them out of those linear pages, which is just, get the look or top 10 best handbags. You want to start thinking about, okay, how about best business looks or best mobile office bag, and start to widen those things out and create content around that.
Thank you so much. There's a question from Carrie. I work in an industry that isn't the most trusted. Do you have any tips for trying to build trust? People build relations about this industry.
Trust is really important, and we've done some work in untrusted industries. I mean, debt management has a lot of challenges. Back in the day, we worked with some gambling sites too. And the key thing there is making sure that About Us page is really strong. Be super open about who you are. Anything you try to hide raises questions. And then the next thing you need to do is check that this is fact checkable. Imagine you're a journalist. They land on your page, they find out about who you are, and then they go onto your CEO's LinkedIn page, and suddenly that company's not listed. You can't afford, in a less trusted industry, to raise any red flags. So you need to make sure there is consistency of all of your brand messaging across all of your sites. Make it easy for people to find out who you are and to track you down. One of the things we often do is tell people that when they're doing press work, make sure that there is a face to that campaign. Make sure that person is identifiable. Make sure you've got an email address that goes straight to press, and ideally a phone number. All of those things tell the world you're not trying to hide.
Thank you so much.
Oh, how can I change my followers and fans on page to real customers and give a visit to know more about me? Okay. So the first thing is I really encourage people to not create fake fans to begin with. Over time, it costs us more to connect with our fans on different social pages. So creating fake ones just for sake of volume doesn't help us, right? So firstly, I'd say start off by creating real ones, and then start talking about things that really matter to you and be consistent. Get involved in conversations, make comments on other people's posts, be interactive. That really helps. When you start to be part of your community starts to be part of your world as well. And over time, you'll find that people start to drop off that aren't relevant. But yes, when you've got followers that aren't right, it can take a little time to shed them. But it's also giving people a reason to visit your site. What is the why? If they're getting everything they need from your social pages, why would they come to the site? But, if you're sharing snippets of something and then saying to find out more, come here, that is very different. And so giving people an incentive is important. And we often find that some kind of time-based incentive works well. We notice this with press a lot. If you have a story, but it's not time sensitive, it can actually be quite challenging to get a journalist to cover it. And it's not that it's not a good story, but time-sensitive stuff keeps floating to the top of their to-do list, and therefore your story floats down until it starts to feel old to them. So give people an incentive to come to your site sooner rather than later. That can be super important. Or there's the patience game. If they are the right customer for you, and you have the right product, just keep making sure you engage with them, and at some point they will come and convert. And I know that sounds a little bit passive for a marketeer, but our sales cycle can be anything up to 2 years. But we don't push people. We're super gentle because we know that when we work in an integrated way, everyone has to be on board. If we push people to commit and start PR SEO before they're ready, it's a real fight. So we're really happy to wait. And people keep coming back, having little chats. And then when they do come on board, they become customers for years and years on end. So it's about being long-term focused as well. For a lot of time, we've always been quite short-term focused, but we're realizing, as organic SEO got harder, that we had to play longer and longer games. But a long game isn't a bad thing if it's the right game.
You're right, and you explained the most important basics actually, but there are a few questions that are a little bit more specific. For example, it's from Bengi. Love your UN Global Goals Internet Takeover idea. Any suggestions or best case for NGOs on digital?
I would love to help some NGOs on digital. I think there are so many missed opportunities there, and the idea of owning a neighborhood ties so into their goals. My biggest fear is that the internet becomes a trash superhighway of over-optimized content that ultimately ends up fueling the wrong cultural ideals. But NGOs, I think if they start to focus on these wider search terms, I think they can really make a difference. I also have noticed that some of the most important content that the internet needs doesn't exist because there isn't a financial incentive to certain firms. And then the people who have the information for it aren't able to deliver it effectively. So I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I had to help someone buy a wig. I don't know if you know this, but when you get diagnosed with cancer, the time from getting diagnosed, going into chemo can be, and sometimes just a day or two. There were no guides on how to buy a wig online. So much. Firstly, I realized that there was no one map of all the wig shops in the United Kingdom, so I made one. I have that because I had to run around looking at them. I didn't realize that there were different types of wigs. I didn't realize that you could pay money and rent the wigs and take them to the person to try them on. And then so that person didn't have to make it to the store. There were all these bits of information about wig buying that I learned. But I was so busy at that point in time, I never wrote it down. I never shared it. And I think what we could really use is a way to capture information from people who have knowledge and have learned it in times of trauma, but don't have the ability to translate it into high quality content. And I think NGOs would be really well focused on having initiatives that do that. Because to communicate information verbally, what I've just said is the beginning of a campaign for someone. But, if an NGO had the facilities to say, right, we're going to take this, we're going to make it, we're going to do something with it, and just allowing someone to talk out their knowledge, as opposed to expecting them to write it down or build a content piece, I think we would see much more useful content populate online and more accurate, because content that's not written by a true specialist doesn't tend to work as well as content that's written by someone who really knows about their subject matter.
Thank you so much. What are some books or websites would you like to recommend to read or follow?
So I always tell people, watch yourself, watch how you read online. A couple of years ago, I was observing myself online and I realized, oh, wow, I've clicked through about 10 media websites this morning and all I've done is read a headline. And then I went and did some research and I realized that 70% of people don't actually read more than a headline. And I was like, so what does that tell me about my media strategies? I have to be able to communicate brand stories and brand identities in headlines. If the headlines aren't strong, I'm not going to be able to tell the story. So by watching ourselves, we probably learn more than we do from most books. Mm-hmm. That being said, I'm a big fan of any old school journalism books. The nature of communicating news hasn't changed that much. The delivery mechanisms, yes, but as a digital marketeer, you know those. But getting to the very crux of what makes a strong story, well, humans haven't changed, really at the core. So understanding that is super important. So I would go looking for the oldest, dustiest book on the shelf around crafting news stories if you can. And I would read a selection of content. Think about what is the last thing that you would normally watch. So I have, I'll watch BBC and I have a subscription to Fox News. And actually, during the US elections, I had both up at the same time. I wanted to see how these stories were being told differently. I was buying in the newspapers and I was looking at how the same story was also worded differently the next day, because it taught me a lot about how those publications work and how to spin stories to get into certain audiences. So I would highly advise you to read ferociously news and read opposite sides of each story.
Thank you. We have a little bit time. Maybe we can answer one or two questions. From Soumya, for feminine care product category, how to conduct Pr Seo campaign with most of the SERP is dominated by medical or government websites, which aren't always open for PR initiatives.
Yeah, it can be really challenging to do things in the medical space. What I would start to do is look at the wider search terms. Where does your audience sit that isn't creating those aspects of optimization? And what are the wider subjects that you have relevance in? If you're working in medicine, well, the rise of digital medicine is incredibly popular. So I imagine that most of the governments and most of the medical sites that you're talking about aren't looking around the future of digital medicine. So you could create a round table, create a huge white paper around that and start to own that space. Because sometimes we have to accept that the space we're in is maybe we've missed the boat. So where is the next space and how do we get ready for that? And making sure that you've got campaigns and content that are starting to speak to that and that you're positioning yourself as an expert ahead of time. One of the other tactics that we've seen work really well is people essentially getting famous authors, to be part of their websites. We see this a lot in gambling, actually. They'll get a really famous sports person to write for their blog. And so with that, they bring their whole audience. And then that content starts to optimize better and better over time. I have noticed that there is a requirement to almost keep churning that. And I don't think that's really a bad thing. It means you're getting more voices and more audiences exposed to who you are. And I think this growth of micro-targeting of micro audiences and micro influencers is going to continue because the cost of these big influencers is just too much. And we need the data to be able to prove it. That's the problem when we do a big PR SEO campaign. There's a lot of budget and time going in. And if you don't know for certain that it's going to fly, you could really damage a business's view on this approach. So, starting off small and doing quick things and finding out which ones really work, gaining your knowledge there, and then applying it to bigger and bigger ones over time is important. And the one thing you'll notice in the medical industry is very similar to law. A lot of businesses struggle to get spokespeople that can respond fast. And journalists really quite often need a medical expert to be quoted in articles. If you could hire one that's willing to talk to the press and that can turn things around fast, you'll start to raise brand awareness, not just in print and with inbound links, but with journalists themselves over time, because that is something they desperately need.
Thank you so much. Okay, for my last question, do you think the brand searches for a certain online shop influence the organic rankings for non-brand searches for the same online shop?
We definitely see that branded search changes results. As a brand becomes more popular, more pages optimize. And there's some logic to this. If we trust brands, so Google's trying to give us the best result for our query. And if we're typing in sneakers, we probably want a sneaker brand we know. We don't actually want a no-name brand. And so if Google optimizes a big brand, we're more likely to click on that and purchase on that site. But that doesn't mean small brands can't compete. But I do think that brand recognition and brand familiarity does have an impact on user behavior, and therefore it has an impact on search rankings. And if you're getting more click-throughs to your site and people are staying on your site and making conversions, you're consistently telling Google that you are the right result for certain searches. And Google can delineate between a branded search and the categories with which you sit under. So I think there's fairly strong evidence to substantiate it. I have some data for it, but the problem with all of the digital marketing industry is that we don't just do one thing. We're optimizing pages, we're building new pages, we're putting out new campaigns, we're building links from different places, we have ad campaigns running. So it's very hard to say in isolation. But typically we find that all SEO increases when branded searches go up.
Thank you so much, Lexi. It's so glad to have you at Digitalzone 21. For everything being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and feel free to tweet me if you have further questions, anyone, and have a lovely day. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.